it's very tempting to want to turn every creative passion into a business and a career and a way of making a living. And when it works out like that, it can be, this really jackpot moment. But I think some of that leads to kind of thinking about money first and the core of the work second, or it can. And I think it's something that I have to check myself on pretty regularly in the studio of, is this really the work that I authentically want to be making, or is this the work that I think will be popular and appealing?
A movement is underway of people abandoning the emotional, physical, and financial expenses of city living and crafting their own purpose, livelihoods, and joy in the rural reaches. The Urban Exodus podcast shares the wisdom, wit, and stories of those who decided to embark on the road less traveled, to pursue their own interpretation of the good life. Small business owners, change makers, artists, farmers, and more, working towards building a better future for themselves and their fellow citizens. This podcast is for country dreamers, rural folk, and urban dwellers alike who want to feel more connected to the natural world and the purpose and choices in their lives. I'm Alyssa Hessler. Welcome to the Urban Exodus. I'm excited to invite you to my conversation with artist, embroiderer, and DIY designer Sarah K. Benning, who is working within the realm of contemporary embroidery. She creates one-of-a-kind hand-stitched artworks, DIY kits, and digital embroidery patterns. Sarah studied painting in college and left school without any gainful employment opportunities. She took a job in a grocery store, and in her free time, she began experimenting with embroidery as a medium to make art. Documenting her work and process on Instagram in the early days of the app amassed Sarah an enormous online following that helped her begin selling her work. Growing slowly, she eventually reached a point where she felt like she could make this her full-time hustle. Sarah has slowly built a sustainable arts business by constantly evolving her work and offerings to keep up with the wants and needs of her customers. Now both Sarah and her husband work full-time to run the business. They're able to live outside of the city and have much more flexibility in their lives. This is a story of making your passion your profession, being open and willing to make creative evolutions, rural entrepreneurship in the digital age, the lost art of embroidery, and so much more. I hope you enjoy it. So I am really excited to invite Sarah Benning to the show. I have followed Sarah's art for such a long time, and you create these beautiful masterpieces using kind of almost a forgotten art form, but one that's really coming back into popularity, kind of needlepoint and embroidery. And you've created a really interesting business that is multifaceted, that has allowed you to live outside of the city and make a living for yourself. So I'm really excited to have you on the show and for you to tell your story. And first off, I'd love to just hear a little bit of your personal backstory, where you grew up, where you've lived, and how you met your partner.
Thank you so much for having me first. I'm really excited to talk about all the things we're going to talk about today, and I'm just very appreciative of the opportunity to share more about myself and my work and living outside of an urban center. Because I think that in the art world, at least in my experience, kind of growing up and going through art school, that was the assumption, was that you needed to be in a city to make a creative life for yourself. So yeah, I grew up in Baltimore. My mom moved us there when I was young, and I lived there through high school, and really, really appreciate having grown up there and being in that city. And I had the incredible privilege to attend the Baltimore School for the Arts, which is a magnet high school in the city that splits the day between academics and art. And in my case, I was in the visual arts department. So that's kind of where I got my foundation kind of art skills and early kind of professional art skills. And from there, I moved to Chicago for college. I went to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. I was really drawn there because it was kind of the opposite approach to art than my high school experience, which was very rooted in sort of direct observation and kind of foundational skills, whereas SAIC was much more focused on the conceptual side of things and thinking and kind of problem solving and figuring things out, and was less tied to more traditional modes of making. And upon graduation, I decided that maybe art wasn't really the path for me. Actually, I think I was feeling very burnt out after 8 years of really rigorous, focused study and needed a break. And I left Chicago like the day after my graduation, I think, from undergrad. Didn't really tell anyone, just kind of vanished from the city and moved back across country to Albany, New York, where my then boyfriend, now husband, was in school at SUNY Albany. So it was sort of a convenient move. We had already been dating for a couple years at that point, mostly long distance. We did meet in Chicago really randomly at a house party, as one does in your early 20s. But yeah, so I moved to Albany, and at the time I felt, kind of like an art school failure, like leaving such an exciting, vibrant art city like Chicago to go somewhere with a little less luster. Albany felt very small to me, and I definitely wasn't tapped into any kind of scene when I first got there. But I think looking back, it was really an essential move that helped me get to where I am now in terms of career, and because I was able to live much more cheaply than I would have been able to do in Chicago, and it sort of freed up some time and financial resources to pursue creative work, which wasn't my intention. Of course, I was on this path of taking a break, but
it called to you. I wonder if also maybe the comparison game, like getting out of, being in such an intensive experience with the arts and having so many other people that are creating things, if like taking a step back and like being able to listen to your own voice maybe helped a little bit.
Yeah, I was only in Albany for 2 years, and the first year was also the first year of kind of full independence. I, was very extremely privileged to have had some family financial help and scholarship to get through school. So I was able to graduate without a mountain of student loan debt, and my rent had been covered partially through college. So it was this transition from like very kind of coddled youth to like, oh man, now I need to figure some things out. And making art as a living didn't seem like a very responsible choice. So I worked as a nanny initially and kind of picked up embroidery as a hobby while I was doing that, and later worked at a grocery store. And my partner worked, he was a student, but also worked retail and food service jobs, and we kind of just pieced things together. But in Albany, what was so amazing was that I did end up connecting with some really incredible and inspirational women and this kind of community, like craft independent maker community that is extremely vibrant and wonderful in Albany and the capital region. And I think that it sort of opened up some possibilities for me.
Is there any name of that community if anybody's living in those areas and wants to get connected?
I mean, I don't think it was like really an organized group.
Just go to the craft fairs and ask around.
Yeah. Basically, yes. I'm not sure the status of things now, kind of at this stage in the pandemic, but the Half Moon Market is organized by Caroline Corrigan and, oh my gosh, Adelia, but I'm totally blanking on her last name. But it's a really wonderful sort of craft fair market that's only a few years old, but I can definitely say that Caroline and Adelia were really sort of inspirational folks early on for me. And yeah, I mean, I'd say this applies really to anywhere that you find yourself if you are in this kind of creative business world. Like, curated local markets are wonderful.
Yeah, it's good to meet other makers and other kind of mentors almost, to see people that have turned this into their career. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the early days of your practice and when you realized that you might be able to turn this passion into a profession.
So, like I mentioned, I picked up embroidery purely as a hobby. I was really craving a creative outlet, but one that felt outside of the fine art world. I felt a lot of pressure making fine art to be very sort of serious and profound. And embroidery seemed like a creative endeavor that didn't require that. I don't know. There's all kinds of like psychological stuff wrapped up in that that I'm continuously kind of unpacking and reprogramming myself on. But I started stitching and was just doing it for myself and kind of was amassing this pile of small works. At the time, it was mostly kind of abstract geometric designs on paper, because that's what I had an abundance of was paper and sort of leftover supplies from art school. And I eventually opened an Etsy shop, and Etsy kind of operated a little differently back then with this sort of rotating homepage. And I just kind of started getting featured on that homepage quite a bit. And after about a year and a half of working a day job, whether it was nannying or working at Whole Foods, I started to establish myself. And I think it was the first month that I made more money through my online sales than I was making at my job at Whole Foods. I put in my notice. And I think it took me about a year and a half to get to that stage. I also have to mention that I was, I think, 23 at that point. Our rent in Albany was maybe $700 that I was splitting with my partner. We didn't really have very many responsibilities. And I always felt like I could go back and get that same kind of job again if I needed to. So it felt like the risk was fairly low to kind of commit to full-time creative self-employment. And at that stage, I was working, 40 hours at work and probably another 40 hours at home. And it wasn't sustainable. I needed to kind of make a decision. And so, yeah, I went out on like the limb of self-employment.
So it took about like a year or two basically to find some sort of financial foothold where you felt like, okay, I can do this. I'm going to try this out. How did you go about funding the startup costs associated with getting your business up and running? Were there any like additional things that you had to kind of bring in once you realized, all right, I'm going to make this my full-time thing? Or was it kind of a slow, gradual build?
It was definitely a slow, gradual build. And I would say that I'm still on that path. I don't have any kind of formal training or education in business. It's been very much a kind of learn as I go process. And I have certainly made a lot of mistakes, and hopefully I'm learning from them and kind of making new mistakes rather than the same ones over and over again. But the slide into self-employment for me was so gradual that I don't know. I think back then I wouldn't have even known the phrase like startup costs or anything. Like, it took me a year and a half to feel like I could leave my job, but I wouldn't say at that stage I was actually in a very stable position. And, even now I think it is just this ongoing process in creative small business. It's like I've got to always kind of be ready to pivot and problem solve and learn something new. There's, stability is kind of a funny word in that sense.
I really appreciate how honest and encouraging you are to other creatives trying to figure out how to make a living doing their art. And in your opinion, what are some of the key steps that you would tell people to take in order to build a sustainable business in the arts?
So I think the first part of building a sustainable business in the art is focusing on the art first. I think it's very easy to get wrapped up at this point in sort of monetizing everything you do as quickly and as much as you can. You know, it's very tempting to want to turn every creative passion into a business and a career and a way of making a living. And when it works out like that, it can be, you know, this really jackpot moment. But I think some of that leads to kind of thinking about money first and the core of the work second, or it can. And I think it's something that I have to check myself on pretty regularly in the studio of, is this really the work that I authentically want to be making, or is this the work that I think will be popular and appealing? And that's a losing game, trying to predict or follow even trends. That's not sustainable. You know, we have to all find our particular point of view and our visual vocabulary as artists. So that would be my first tip, is like, try not to get sucked in to following trends or kind of rushing into artistic, creative self-employment, because you got to be on that like solid foundation level of your own creative voice first. From there, I think what I try to do is just be open to continuously learning and open to and flexible with changes. You know, I'm running my business primarily online and have been from the beginning, but the online landscape changes all the time. Marketplaces like Etsy, for example, change constantly. Social media is such a wonderful tool, can be a wonderful tool, but also is constantly in flux. And I think if you're going to go into creative business, you've got to be realistic about that. There's no arrival. There's just kind of this endless journey, which is full of really incredible highs, but comes with some definite lows and challenges along the way. And for me, a real game changer was, the second I was able to afford it, was to hire an accountant and consultant who could help me manage those aspects of running a business that I'm not good at, like keeping track of money. It's not a strength of mine. It's not a strength of my partner's. So we outsource that to someone who has expertise in that area.
You know, it's kind of like the cart before the horse if you're thinking about all the ways that you can monetize these things that you're kind of dabbling in, but like really feeling like this is what I do and knowing that and not following trends. I think that also is really important, because if you're following trends, then once that's not trending anymore, then it's over, it's dried up. But if it is authentically you, if it's your voice, if it's what you're creating and you stay true to that, then there is no trend. It's just people are investing in you. What type of art did you do in art school?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because it is not at all. I mean, I can see some through lines in relationship to what I'm doing now, but visually it was very, very different. I was still deeply invested in sort of meditative and repetitive process, which I think connects very directly to embroidery and stitching. But whereas now I create a lot of very representational, kind of playful plants and interior scenes, in school I was working abstractly, creating pieces based around time and process. So, for example, I made a lot of pieces of sort of precise, huge numbers of pinpricks in paper, or you know, creating drawings from an entire ballpoint pen, or taking a photograph of 10,000 steps around the city, things like that. Very sort of art schooly, abstract, conceptual things but very tied to the physicality of using my body to make something.
Calling all small and rurally based business owners. Do you love Urban Exodus and want to help support our continued programming? Become a founding partner of the new Urban Exodus shop. You can reach an engaged customer base who believes in supporting farmers, makers, artisans, and small business owners in rural economies. We are looking for culinary delights, home goods, body goods, art, textiles, adornments, more. We just are really interested to see what you're creating and try to help you get it out there to a larger audience. And we're looking for vendors who make quality products, who pay a living wage, and who run sustainably minded operations. And if this sounds like you and your business and you want to learn more, please click the partnerships page on urbanexodus.com. I know that going to art school, they really drive home the importance of living in a city, the importance of getting into galleries. And like that is like just this really driving element that is driving a lot of artists. And I love that you've kind of gone the other way. What advice would you give to artists and maybe small business owners who are living in the city who would like to move to a smaller community, but they're worried about losing professional opportunities and maybe relationships or the credentials that they have by living in the city?
Yeah, so I'll preface my answer with the fact that I've never lived as an adult kind of working professional artist in a city. So I don't have the experience of building a career there and then walking into a different place. But I did, since college, we moved to Albany, then we moved to Menorca, Spain for a couple of years and wound up in New Hampshire after that. In the beginning of 2017, we moved to a cottage in Warren, New Hampshire, which is at the base of the White Mountains. It's kind of in the middle of the state. This town had maybe 800 people living in it. We lived in a field. It was beautiful. Sort of, we thought we'd give the kind of homesteading nature life a try. That was too far for us. That we went a little bit too far out into the country for us, 40 minutes from the grocery store. We ended up in Keene, which is where we are now, and it's sort of a, depending who you talk to, small city. Still feels like a small town to me, but you know, we've got a vibrant main street and coffee shops and bars and stores, and it feels quaint and homey, and you know, it comes with its own downsides as well. But I would say that we all have the ability to find community wherever we are. When you're in a smaller place, maybe the pool is also smaller, and you might have to work a little harder seeking out folks that share your interests and values and all of that. But there's also a great potential to really build the community that you want and create the spaces that you want, even if they don't exist yet in smaller towns, that I think can be really, really exciting. And also, we live in this digital age where just because you're physically located one place doesn't mean you might not have opportunities elsewhere. I think that can be really wonderful. And I think that finding a balance between like being engaged in your local community and being open to opportunity beyond that is kind of that sweet spot. I'm still really working on getting kind of embedded in my local community, creative community, broader community here in Keene. We've been here for about 3.5 years, but you know, New England can be a challenging place to really mesh with if you're not from here.
You know, I moved to Maine. I'm a Northern Californian. It just takes a while for people to know that you're there and you're committed. And I think that exactly what you're saying, by plugging yourself into the community as much as you're plugging yourself into efforts of like building something sustainable outside of that community as well, because usually it takes both to be a small business person. You have diversified your business a lot to create a lot of different passive and active revenue streams to reach a wider audience, which I really appreciate because, you know, some of your pieces, obviously it takes a lot of time to create some of your work. So it might be inaccessible to some people who really love your work, but they could do it themselves or they could learn one of your patterns. I'd love for you to describe how your business looks now and your decision-making process to grow and to expand into other areas.
So kind of along the same lines as my financial planning or lack thereof, when I set out on this path, I was creating work, just kind of one-off. I think I toyed with the idea of making multiples or sort of to order pieces. But at the beginning, my pricing was really skewed and in an unsustainable way. I was not charging enough for the actual time that goes into the work. And I started a digital pattern program in 2016. As an experiment, I had never anticipated being interested in or even really capable of kind of teaching what I do to other people to do themselves. That wasn't an anticipated outcome for me. But at the time and since then, always, I think I was struggling with people helping themselves to my work and recreating it without permission or compensation. And I thought, I don't always have the resources to combat that. So maybe I just make a path to where people who are interested in doing that and interested in having my work, even if they can't, access the original stuff to own, maybe there is enough interest for people to do it themselves. And that's how the pattern program was born. It was really kind of a life-changing step because it did create this avenue of semi-passive income. Of course, I still have to kind of design and produce patterns every month, but it's digital. So once that work is done, it exists and can be accessed by as many people as want to access it. And so that, I think, is really a benchmark of where I was working to survive on a day-to-day basis. And it kind of opened up this door to like, oh, actually, maybe I can create more of a stable life for myself with this work. And yeah, so I guess that was about 5 years ago. I am currently offering monthly patterns, but have decided to take a break for at least some part of 2022 because I kind of need some time to recharge. And it does end up being a bit of a grueling schedule to keep up with designing compelling new stuff month to month. And I have some other larger projects that I want to make sure I make time to work on. But other ways we have diversified is offering prints, which is really fun and is a much more accessible way to kind of live with some of my pieces. And pre-COVID, I was working, doing in-person workshops, which was a really fun way to connect with people face-to-face and visit different parts of the country and different parts of the world and just share my enthusiasm and love for the work that I do. So hopefully I can kind of get back to that at some point in the future. And for now, I actually have just in the past couple of weeks started down a path I'm really excited about where I've been working with combining paint and thread for the past year and a half or so, but I think some things are really clicking for the first time in a way that I'm very excited about. So I'm not sure where it will lead, but that's what I'm up to at the moment, is kind of playing with these mixed media formats.
That's great that you are allowing yourself enough time to play too, because that creative play is the evolution. All artists need to leave themselves that time to evolve their work in addition to running their business.
Yeah, absolutely. And a key reason that I'm even able to do that is because I don't do this by myself. My husband is also my business partner, and, we run this whole operation together. So there are times when he's able to do, more of the heavy lifting with the day-to-day business operations, and that allows me more time and space to be in the studio working on things that may or may not ever lead to money or something like that. Things that I really need to do as an artist to keep this all going. That's an ongoing sort of evolution and flow, and I'm trying to really let go of this idea of balance, meaning that everything is equal all the time, and accept balance as more of a sort of rhythm of of some work sometimes and other work other times.
I also run a business with my husband, and it's like we have all these different pots of stew like boiling on the stove, and you like vigorously are stirring one pot of stew and the other one you just like turn to a simmer, and it is like it never feels like you're ever going to reach some level of balance, but just like accepting that and letting that be part of the flow. I think that makes a lot of sense. Do you have any tips for couples who want to build a business together on ways to kind of divide roles or communicate or set expectations so that becomes like a really positive experience?
Yeah, I was talking to Davey about this morning, and he jokingly was like, just don't do it. But we actually do enjoy it. And that, like anything else, is an ongoing process of being really open with communication and really honest in that communication, and kind of creating, systems where personal time is personal time and work time is work time, and being, comfortable with each other to say like, hey, I think this is your strength, so we work on that, but maybe this other area I'll kind of pick up on because, maybe that's not the best task. So yeah, kind of really trying to identify strengths and weaknesses and working to support each other in those areas as much as we can. And yeah, something that we're not so good at is creating that distinction between work time and lifetime. It's really only been, kind of the slimmest silver lining of the past year and a half has been that because we were already set up to work at home, and in so many ways we were so lucky and privileged throughout the pandemic to not have it necessarily change a lot of the day-to-day of our business life. We certainly had some problem solving and adjustments to make and challenges, but the real change came in the fact that we, like everyone else, were really limited to being at home. And it was at the beginning very easy to slip into, well, we're home all the time, so we'll work all the time. And that just led to burnout and forced us really into creating much stronger boundaries between work life and life. And so for the first time in my 8 years of doing this, we're really honoring our weekends and making sure that we're, turning off work for the weekend and doing other things. And we're trying to be more designated in where we work in the house. Part of why we ended up in Keene was that we were able to get this incredible Victorian house with all these different rooms. And the idea being we could kind of create some physical separation between studio and living spaces. So we've really leaned into that over this past year. So
you tried on like very, very small town living in a town of 800, and you realized that, maybe that wasn't quite the right fit. And then you found your dream house in Keene. I'd love for you to describe your home, your landscape, and the community that you found there, and any challenges or benefits of living where you do.
So we get asked quite a lot, why Keene? How did you end up here?
I love Keene, by the way.
And yeah, it's cute. It really was the house that brought us here. We had been, pretty nomadic for a while. I lived, basically from a suitcase for about a year and a half while Davey was still living in Spain. And it was really fun. And it was a great sort of youthful time. But I reached a point where I was like, I really need roots and a space to be kind of rooted. And we kind of were ready to think about buying a house rather than jumping from rental to rental. I wanted to sort of take that energy and apply it somewhere else because it's so much time and energy that goes into finding places to live.
And making them your own.
Right, exactly. And
even if they aren't.
Yeah, exactly. And the home environment is just something that's really important to me. I spend most of my time here, even pre-COVID. Most of my time was spent in the house wherever we, or, in our apartment, wherever we happen to be. So home is very important to me. And this house, which I'll be honest, we could not have moved to Keene now. Like so many places, the market is going a little wonky. And, there's a housing crisis at the moment in Keene, both for houses to buy, but also affordable apartments for people to live in. And it's a problem. I don't have the solution, but it's a challenge. So I think that we really got lucky at the different things kind of converged at the moment we were looking to lead us here in a way that we could actually do it. But so, yeah, we live in a really big Victorian house. It's 3 stories, and the 3rd story we don't use currently. It was originally built as servants' quarters, and they've been kind of abandoned for the past 100 years or so. So it's pretty crumbly and cold, and, well, right now it's really hot. It's like an oven up there. So we live and work on the first 2 floors with the hope to someday be able to renovate that 3rd floor space and consolidate and move all of our business and studio stuff up there. I knew that I wanted to maintain a home studio. We kind of toyed with the idea of getting somewhere small and cozy and then investing time and money in renting or leasing or maybe buying a separate studio space. But working at home works for me. So we wanted to find a space that we could kind of grow into and would give us, room. And so that's how we ended up here. And having lived in that really tiny town further north, we knew that we wanted to live somewhere walkable. So we are within walking distance to downtown Keene and, Main Street. And we wanted to also be in a place that we could, within a reasonable amount of time, get back into city life if we wanted. So we're not that far away from New York City. We're still within a day of driving to Baltimore. My mom is still down there, so we like to visit as often as we can. I guess Boston is pretty close. So it's worked out really well for us so far.
I guess you've also seen a real influx of people in your community in, the last couple of years. Being so close on the East Coast, I feel like Maine, our property values have gone up about 30% in the last year and a half. And there's definitely a housing crisis, especially for people who live here year round. I'm wondering if you had any advice for new rural transplants on how to build a rewarding and sustaining life outside the city, and also how to really connect with their new community and to not feel like an outsider.
I think I'm really just finding my footing in terms of really connecting with people here. I'm extremely introverted. And so like meeting people and getting out into the world in general is tough. But I think it's almost harder for me in a small town because there's, you're not anonymous. Like you're going to see the same people in the same places all the time. Whereas there is for me, some sense of security in the fact that in a city, I'm just one of, maybe millions, hundreds of thousands of people anyway. And here, that's not really the case. So I think that's been an adjustment of just, I don't know. I'm not very good at it yet, I think.
It takes a while. And I think that that's good to just remind people, especially if they're in the beginning stages of it. And I mean, especially if they have moved either before or during the pandemic. Like there was kind of this fear of outsiders in a lot of small communities, and it wasn't really the time to make inroads with your neighbors, but that it does take time. And especially if you're an introverted person, which my husband certainly is. And I would say that I probably am more introverted than I am extroverted. So let's see here. What does a perfect day look like for you in Keene?
My ideal day would be spending the afternoon in our garden. I've gotten really into it. Maybe it's a bit of a cliche, but also still very, culturally prevalent up here is just gardening, like vegetable gardening. That is a new experience for me, but we built a raised bed last summer and we built a second one this year. And I even tried planting things right in the ground, which feels so strange to me. And then I think like how strange it is that that feels strange. But yeah, so I've been spending a ton of time planting flowers and vegetables this year. And we've got some really good thrift stores, and that's it. It's pretty quiet.
Thrifting and gardening, that's a perfect day for me, like hands down. That is like the most perfect day. For me, when I moved, it was a similar story. It was kind of strange for me to move to a small town. I felt like that lack of anonymity. It was like, as an introverted person, it made me feel a little bit like more scared to reach out to people because I felt like they already knew my story. So I really found a lot of joy and healing kind of in the garden. What do you love to grow? What are your favorite things that you're growing right now in your garden?
Well, right now we have sugar snap peas that are just going wild. And I think it's like kind of late, but they're just still going nonstop. So that's been really fun because it's just like such a satisfying immediate snack. We're growing 3 different kinds of tomatoes this year, a couple types of eggplant. We did broccoli, which was really satisfying, although I'm realizing the incredible, I mean, not realizing for the first time, but kind of reestablishing in myself the appreciation for farmers because I grew 3 broccoli plants and it was like a single meal. So I'm just having this like, whole new appreciation for our food system and the people that make that happen.
I just wanted to give an enormous thank you to all of you listeners who have made contributions toward the production of this podcast. Every season, I spend about 100 hours preparing, writing, editing, interviewing, and distributing the podcast. And I have hard costs for my editor and for those hosting fees. And it really means so much to me that you find enough meaning and value in this podcast to pledge your support and to keep it going. And if you haven't had a chance to contribute, we've made it really easy for you. Just click the support button on the top of Urban Exodus website and pledge any amount that you like. Thank you again. I really couldn't continue to do this work without you. The first time I grew broccoli and cauliflower, I was like, oh, that's why a cauliflower is so expensive. Why did I never even think of that? Like, just seems so silly, but we're so detached from it now in our society, right? But with broccoli, if you cut it and you leave it there, it usually sends up other little like small shoots like broccoli rabe. And I've like started eating all the leaves too. So I just like, I want to get like the most out of my broccoli.
Right. Right. Yes, I am letting, the little extra babies grow, and I definitely plan on eating those leaves because I've invested time and, physical like water and stuff into it. So I definitely want to return. There are certainly things we miss about being in cities. We miss the spontaneity of going to a museum or a gallery or something whenever we want. But now it just requires a little more planning, and we have other sort of spontaneous things. Like this weekend, we're going to go on a hike and maybe to a swimming hole if the weather is nice. And, maybe something else will take us along the way. Like it's a different pace, but it is fun when you really get into it, I think.
I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your creative process and what the steps are that you typically take to get an idea from conception to completion.
So I have been feeling very sort of untethered and undirected in the studio for a while. So it's kind of a funny time to really think critically about it or define it. But I take a huge amount of inspiration from plants. I've not done an actual count, but probably a couple hundred houseplants that I've kind of collected and cultivated over the years. And I draw direct inspiration from those plants in the subject matter of my work. But I also have found that just the time it takes to care for the plants really gives me time and space to kind of percolate ideas and kind of think about reciprocity in caring for something that's living and then bringing joy back into my life. And I kind of think about my own creative process the same way where, it's this kind of filter for the world, and then it comes out the way it comes out. This past year and a half has been really tough. There's also been a recent death in my family, and so I'm in the process of kind of grieving, and it's been really strange seeing how the collective experience of the pandemic and these sort of personal losses and changes have come out through my work. At the moment, I'm making really light-hearted, bright, vibrant, playful pieces that are not, they visually don't look like how I'm feeling, but I'm just kind of trying to trust my hands and instincts and give into the work that my body is telling me I need to make. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess that's all a very long way of saying it's very intuitive, and I really just try to trust the process. I do a lot of drawing and thinking, and the nature of embroidery is that it's so slow, so I can be working on a piece, but my mind is kind of often elsewhere.
What does a typical day look like for you? Do you have kind of a flow or a schedule to your work day, or do you just kind of unfold more organically?
I go through phases of both. Lately, I've just been letting it kind of flow more organically, at least in the creative work. You know, we do have sort of ongoing structures, you know, and really specific things that need to get done, like drafting a newsletter or finalizing the design for a monthly pattern. And then, you know, there are all these kinds of very specific steps that go into that. You know, once it's drawn, then it has to be stitched and photographed and described and compiled into our PDF template and emailed out to all the people who are subscribers and promoted for people who aren't yet kind of invested in the program. So that all kind of punctuates the more free, experimental, playful studio time. And while I'm doing that, Davey is taking care of kind of inventory management of general supplies, and he assembles all of our kits and deals with general customer service and inquiries and does all of our order fulfillment and kind of takes on those more concrete, like daily business tasks. But yeah, it's all pretty flexible and kind of just flows in the area that it needs to flow. We're not very motivated by kind of endless growth or development. I think all I want is to be able to continue making things every day, and the rest of the puzzle is just figuring out how to do that. But we're not very business minded, I think.
I think we're always taught to like keep pushing, make it more, bigger, better. That's like our capitalist way, right? There's a happy medium that you could just, oh, we're paying our bills. I'm able to do what I love. And I have like time and space to do other things as well. I think more people are starting to realize that like chasing that like endless growth is not serving. It's like deteriorates.
Right.
So that's great that you found that. What do you love most about your business? Like, what is it that you love the most? Is it the experimentation? Is it the new creations, teaching? What are some of your favorite works that you've created in recent years?
Oh, man, I really enjoy all of it, although the sort of teaching components I love because it is nice to connect with people and sort of share this thing. But that definitely falls on the more practical side of things for me. It's just that a piece of the puzzle to make it all work. But I just really love the act of stitching and combining colors and textures. It just, I don't know, I derive so much like pleasure from it. And so that's my favorite, is just doing it. Making it is my favorite part of things. So this feels sort of silly, but I often feel like whatever I'm working on in that moment is kind of my favorite thing. So right now I'm working on these playful mixed media paint and thread and thrifted yarn pieces that are just sort of celebrations of color and texture and pattern. And I'm enjoying it so much. I think I'm finding this really happy place of being able to kind of push the scale that I'm used to working on. Most of my pieces kind of fall in the 3 to 8 inch size. So it's all very compact, small work. But with combining the paint and the thread, I'm able to work a little bit faster and a little bigger. And it's just really fun right now working on those things.
When are you going to get those out into the world? I'd love to see them.
So I've posted a couple pictures over the past few days on Instagram. So they are kind of out in the public there. And that's it for now.
I'm looking at them right now. They're so cool.
Thank you.
I love it.
Yeah, I'm just really having fun at the moment in the studio. And it feels really, really good to kind of give in to that joy and pleasure and fun because, the ocean was on fire and billionaires are in space and things feel totally out of control.
This is something you have control of, and it's something that's beautiful that you're putting into the world. I understand that entirely. I feel like it's interesting with artists. We kind of like come full circle, in our creative journeys. We like come back to things, like we pick up breadcrumbs that we leave for ourselves. And like this paint is like a breadcrumb of this other part of you that's like now fusing with this. And it becomes like this next evolution in your work.
Yeah. That's what it's feeling like. It's exciting because it's not always like that.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes you kind of bang your head up against the wall and be like, I'm doing the same thing over and over. Like, what's the next thing? But here it is. That's great. Let's see. Are there any misperceptions about being an entrepreneur in a small town that you would like to dispel?
I don't know if it's really specific to being in a small town, but I was recently in a conversation with a young person who graduated from high school last spring. They were kind of expressing some frustration and uncertainty about like what they're supposed to be doing with themselves and with the rest of their lives. And he mentioned how like nice and easy and straightforward my path has been, that I wanted to be an artist and now I am an artist and I'm doing it professionally and successfully. And I would like to dispel the idea that anybody's path is sort of a straight line and that it's okay to be sort of winding and figure things out as you go. And like, I never in a million years would have predicted as a young person that I would be doing embroidery in the first place and be building a career from it. So I think, I don't know, I think right now with outlets like social media and Instagram, it's easy to look at where people are or, what they're showing you, where they are and how they are. It's easy to think that was always the goal. And I think that that's not true.
It's curated and it doesn't tell the whole journey, right?
Yeah.
I wonder actually if you could speak a little bit about the positives and negatives of social media in your life from a business and personal perspective, and any steps that maybe you've taken to establish healthier boundaries.
That's another ongoing process. I have to acknowledge the incredible sort of power that Instagram in particular has had in building the life that I have now. It has been a really key tool and has opened a lot of doors and given me a lot of opportunities. That being said, I started using it in 2014, and I think looking back on it now, it's like sort of invaded my brain in this very strange way that isn't healthy or good all the time. It's this incredible tool, but I think that we have to all kind of be careful and manage the ways that it affects our life. I have a hard time, creating boundaries, but over the past couple of years, I've been trying to be more conscientious with myself and kind of monitor how much time I'm spending on the app and feel more secure in taking breaks. I took the month of June off of Instagram, and it was really great to just get back into my physical daily life and kind of spend a month just with my own thoughts and not be wondering constantly, like, are these my thoughts or are these thousands of other people's thoughts? So I don't know. I think I'm still really just figuring it out. I can't deny that social media has been a really important part of building my career, but at the same time, I have really mixed feelings about it personally.
Do you have any advice for maybe it's a young artist who wants to get their work out there on ways to kind of build community and following on social media? You've amassed an outrageous number of followers, which I would imagine feels a little bit overwhelming.
Oh, it's so overwhelming. I don't want to come across as like ungrateful or snarky about it, but it's like a huge responsibility that I didn't anticipate or know even really how to deal with, speaking to so many people and kind of, being responsible in that and making sure that I'm living by, my own values and doing my best to not, hurt other people or I don't know. It's a complicated space to navigate. And sometimes it feels like having amassed such a huge community online becomes kind of its own job in a way, because I don't know anything. I'm not an authority on anything. And yet sometimes it feels like there is this pressure to be an authority on everything. And it's like, I don't want that. I don't think that's a responsible way to be. But I would say for yourself, kind of have some distinct goals that you want. If you're going to use Instagram or any other kind of social media platform to promote your work, whatever that is, what does that mean to you? Because the space becomes a very fluid kind of space where are you speaking as a business? Are you speaking as a person? Is the line between those things so blurry that it doesn't really matter? Or, I'm definitely working on my own set of boundaries for how I show up and when I show up and what I'm saying and what am I trying to do? Am I trying to make friends with lots of other artists? Because that's a really wonderful aspect of Instagram. I've been able to meet and kind of connect with so many incredible creative people. But that's different than am I connecting with my customer base, which is different than am I connecting with my friends, which is different than am I, talking about human rights or political issues or, I think just being specific with yourself about what you're doing and what your goals are is really important to navigating that space. And I also would like to say that growing a huge audience maybe shouldn't be the goal, because I don't have 500,000 customers, but, my Instagram is somewhere around there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, like the results, honestly, the best thing that you can do as a business is to grow your newsletter. I think that we sometimes get distracted, or it's the, trying to compare yourself to others thing too, trying to if I have the highest number, then I'll reach this level of success. But it's those individual relationships with your customers, with your clients over time that really are enduring.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've taken up a lot of your time, so I'll just have one last question for you. The last year and a half obviously have been an extremely difficult time. I really apologize. So sorry for your loss and your family. I wonder what this difficult time has taught you and how you're carrying that really into your work and your goals for the future.
Yeah, I think I'm still in the processing phase of all of that, because it doesn't really feel like things are over. But I think what it's taught me is, or what I've experienced is sort of this reevaluation of what's important and kind of this opportunity to imagine a future that is different from the past and present that we're in. And so much of this past year and a half and so much of just our current situation that is the result of much, much older systems and patterns. I think that this has been an opportunity to kind of reevaluate and reimagine and move forward differently. On a personal level, that has really been focused on thinking about what our actual goals are. And it goes back to like, we don't actually want endless growth. And, I do really value time off, and I haven't always allowed that for myself or felt like I could do that. And so I think, just sort of really deciding, being more intentional with how I spend my time and where I invest my energy I've been a little bit more focused on that over this past year and a half, and hope that kind of continues on into the future.
Well, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you, Sarah. I love your work. I love how encouraging and just like open and honest and wonderful you've been online too. Really encouraging to other creatives and truthful too, telling the whole truth of it, because I think that sometimes it's really easy for people to just be like, I got here through hard work and that's it,
Yeah, hard work's a part of it, but there's a lot more.
It is. It's a lot more. So I really appreciate that about you. And thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Yeah, thank you again for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, and how can people find your work, just in case they don't already?
Yeah, well, so I do have a newsletter, and you can find the sign up for that on sarahkbenning.com, and then also on Instagram at sarahkbenning. Those are the main spots. And if you're ever passing through Keene, we're about to start monthly, kind of very casual, bring your own craft kind of hangouts at this wonderful space called Terra Nova and Nova Arts. So, knock on wood, that'll continue through this fall.
That's great. That'll be such a great way for you to build creative community there and kind of abroad too.
Yeah, that's the hope. Looking forward to it. But yeah, thanks so much. This is great.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Sarah Benning. I am so inspired by Sarah's artistic journey of building slowly over time, taking a leap from a side hustle to full-time artist, and constantly evolving her offerings, practices, and processes. I also really appreciate her journey of leaving the city and moving to a tiny community before realizing that maybe a slightly larger town felt more like home. Sarah's story speaks to both the intense amounts of work it requires to build your own business and also the tremendous rewards of having more autonomy over your own life. I encourage you to peruse Sarah's online shop or consider taking one of her workshops. You can find photos from Sarah's beautiful creative home and studio and links to her website and social media on the blog by visiting urbanexodus.com. Hi friends, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Urban Exodus podcast. Urban Exodus is a labor of love and is only made possible by listener support. I do this work because the people I meet through this project give me energy and hope for the future. My mission is to promote the work of people manifesting good in the world. We are living in a time where there's an overwhelming feeling of dread, and I want this project to encourage people to be proactive and work towards finding creative solutions for both their individual happiness and our collective experience. You can support this work by clicking the support button at the top of urbanexodus.com, by buying an ad spot in an upcoming episode, by shopping our online store, or taking an in-person or online course through our workshops at How Hill Farm. We are also slowly getting our Patreon page together, and we'll be adding bonus features and other content there, so check out patreon.com/urbanexodus to learn more. Another way to support is by giving us a 5-star rating on iTunes and recommending Urban Exodus to your friends. Thank you again for helping me continue to do this work. I couldn't do it without all of you. You can find Urban Exodus on Instagram and Facebook at The Urban Exodus. To read more in-depth features on folks who ditched the city and went country, visit urbanexodus.com. Until next time, I'm Alyssa Hessler, and this is The Urban Exodus.